Hi, my name is Ken Hales. I work in the tech space, and today we're going to be doing code.org Unit 5 um, Hackathon. So I think that's lessons 13 through 17 for Unit 5. We're going to be working on that today. There are some requirements of the project. The first one is that you need to have at least 3 screens. The second one is that you need to be working with at least one list or one data set. And the third one is that you either need to reduce, map, or filter the list, and we are going to be doing filtering today. So first, let's see what our data set looks like. Now, if I go to data, click on science, and then we have African American inventors and scientists. This is the one that I am going to be working on today. But as you can see, there are several other data sets that you can work with, like COVID cases, politics, um, board games, Grammy winners, most followed Instagram. There are several other data sets that you can work with, but for what we're doing today, I'm going to be doing African American inventors and scientists. So I'll just click on that and import the data set, and I'm going to click on the table name just to see what we have here. So we have name, date of birth or death, occupation, and inventions and accomplishments. So these are some of the things that we're going to be filtering on when we get to the code level. So I noticed that for date of birth, pretty much most of them have a date of birth. It ranges between the 1700s to the 1800s to the 1900s. So we're going to have 3 buttons that signify that. So I want it to be a case where a user can come to my app. Maybe they want to find out which American or which African American inventor was born in the 1700s versus which ones were born in the 1800s. What did they do? What were their accomplishments? So that's kind of how I'm going to set up my app. There are some of them that show up as unknown, like this one, so I'm going to make sure I have a separate button for that as well. So let's go to the design. Now that we've looked at our data, looked at the options that we have here, let's go to the design. So I'm going to add a label, and I'm going to make sure to name it appropriately for what my app is. African American Inventors and Scientists. Let's put that in the middle. I am going to align the text in the center, and I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger than what it is right now. Increase the font size just a little. All right, I think that's good. I'm going to add in a couple of icons as well. But first, let me change the label. I'm going to change this to home title. Let's go to the label. Sorry, let's go to the image. Let's drag over an image here. And I want the icon to be, let's change the image. I'm going to use an icon, and I'm going to use like the gear, maybe the gear and the wrench, the gear on one side, the wrench on one side, because it's, it's about inventions and science. So let's make it seem appropriate. All right, so I'm going to duplicate this, drag it over on this side, and I'm going to change the icon to be the wrench. Perfect. So I think I'm satisfied with this and this now. Now I'm going to add in like just like a prompt, which will say I am looking for inventors born in the, and let's put a dot dot dot. I'm gonna call this home prompt. And then I'm gonna add in some buttons. So I'll have in the 1700s. Let's make that font a little bit bigger, because why not? And make this a little bit bigger as well, because we can fill up the whole screen. Why not? All right. I'm also going to duplicate this and drag that down. This is going to be the 1800s. And I'm going to duplicate this, drag it down. This will be the 1900s. Let's duplicate this, drag it down. This will be unknown. Let's make that font a little bit smaller. Perfect. So this is going to be my home screen. Now I just want to make sure I have my labels correct. So let's go back to 1700. This is going to be my 1700s button. This will be my 1800s button. My 1900s button. Platoon, no button. And this is going to be my unknown. Oh, I always misspell that word. Button. And then this has a label of home prompt. This doesn't have a label. I'll just do home image 1. And I'll do home image 2. All right, so everything now has a label or an ID, which is exactly what we want. Now the other thing is that this screen is called screen 1. I'm going to rename this to home. And I am going to also create a second screen just to start out where someone can click on 1700s. It will take them to a 1700 screen that will list all of the inventors that were born in the 1700s. I'm going to create a second screen. I'm just going to click on the white background in the screen here and duplicate it. So now I have the home screen and I have screen 1. So let's go back to home. Home looks good. Then I have screen 1 here. All my IDs have been removed, but we're going to make some changes. So this is going to be the 1700s. That's going to be the name of my screen. All right, so now I have 2 screens, home and 1700s. I am going to drag this button down. This is going to be my go back button or go back to home. Decrease that font size just a tad. I'm going to delete these other buttons because I don't need them. And I think I can change this now to be 1700s. And I'll just align it to the center. So align it in the center. And let's make that font bigger. There. Yeah. And then I will add in a text area, and this text area is going to be my output. So all of the inventors and so on will just go here. Okay, so let me make sure I set my labels correctly. This is going to be 1700s image 1, 1700s image 2, 1700s title, 1700s. Well, we had home prompt, so we'll just call it 1700s prompt for consistency. 1700s output, and this is 1700s go back. All right, so everything has a label now or an ID. Yep, everything has an ID. So great. So now I have 2 screens, the home screen and the 1700 screen. And this section, the 1700s output, is where my inventors are all going to go. So let's go to the code. So we've looked at the data. We have our basic design. Let me go back to the home screen. Let's go to the code. And we can pick different themes here, but I'm just going to stick with what we have. Great. So now we have at least 2 screens to work with. Later on, we're going to add the 1800 screen, the 1900 screen, and the unknown. So very first thing that we want to do is define our outline of what we're trying to program here today. So first, we need to declare variables, and I'm just using the show text. If you want to do show blocks, you can click on that button. Then we need to create our filtered lists. Then we need to do um, our on events. So what happens when users press on a certain button? On events for buttons. And then we need to add our filter function and of course our update screen function. So if we go to the help and tips, we have the update screen pattern. We're going to use this today. And we also have our list filter pattern. We're definitely going to use this today as well. So as you can see, we have initially the lists, right, that we are creating. We have our filters, we have the filter function, and then at the very end, we'll have our update screen function. And we also need to have our on events for our buttons. So if we can get through these 5 things, we should be able to code this appropriately. So the very first piece is to add in our variables. Now, if we look at the data set, we have several different columns here. The variables that I care about, meaning the things that I want to appear on the screen, is going to be the name. I definitely want users to see the name. I want them to see the date of birth and death. I want them to see the occupation, and I want them to see the inventions. So there are at least 4 variables that I'm going to create here because there are 4 things that I want the user to see. So let's start off. All right, let's just comment this out real quick. Let me go to show blocks and let me try that again. There are birth years and we'll do get column. I'm going to do African American inventors and scientists, and the column that we want is date of birth or death. Okay, so I'm going to just remove this. All right, and then we'll just repeat. So the next one is going to be the inventors. That's just going to have their names. We'll use get column, choose the same table, but we're going to go with name. Let's do this again. We're going to go with occupations, get column, we're choosing the same table. We want occupations, and then we want inventions, get column, choose that data set, and oh, that's the wrong column. I want the inventions. All right, so we have everything that we need here. So we've declared our variables. Maybe later on we'll add more, let's see. But for right now, we're good with this. Now we're going to create our filtered list. And we're filtering everything that's listed here. We're filtering all of the variables that we just created, or all of the lists that we just created. So I'm going to define a variable. And I'm going to put filtered birth years. It's kind of a long variable name, but very descriptive. So we'll keep it as is. This one will be filtered inventors. And that's going to be an empty list. All of these are going to be empty lists to start. As we work through our code, we're going to fill in the lists. Okay. Filtered occupations. This is also going to be an empty list. And the last one is filtered inventions. And this will be an empty list. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to do our on events, but before we do our on events, let's create our filter function and update screen function first, and then we'll do our on events. The reason we're going to do that is because the on event for that button, when someone clicks on the 1700s button, is going to call the filter function and the update screen function. So let's create those first, and then we'll do the on event. So I'm going to go to functions, drag in our filter function here. And I'm going to specify it to say this will be for filtering the 1700s, right? So when we get to 1800s, I'll do another filter function. When we get to 1900s, I'll do another one. So for the 1700s, we're going to use the list filter pattern that we have here. So first, let me actually add this in comments. We're going to loop through list of inventors, and then we are going to check if birth year starts with 17, and then if yes, add inventors to filtered list. So when I say inventors here, I'm talking about the inventors and everything that comes along with them. So we're adding the inventors to the filtered list. We're also filtering their birth years, occupations, and inventions. So we're filtering everything at that point. So let's start off with the for loop. For var I equals 0, starting at beginning of the list. That's what this means. I is less than inventors.length. So that means we're going from 0 to the end of the inventors list. I plus plus, which means we're incrementing I by 1 every time. So we're going from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. All right, so what we want to do here is see if the first two numbers start with 17. So if I look through the birth years, remember we have a list of birth years here. If I look through every element of that list, if the first two numbers start with 17, then I want to do a filter. So I'll just create a variable for first two numbers. If the first two numbers, so we'll grab what the first two numbers should be. So that's going to be birth years. We want to grab a substring from 0 to 2 because we want to grab the first two numbers. That's why we go from 0 to 2. All right, and then let's actually test this out first before we create our if statement. So what I want to do is console.log. Actually, let me do it on the, let's do it here. Let's do console.log birth years. And then let's do console.log first two numbers. So this is just testing to see if it works. So here I want to see what exactly we're going to be filtering. I want to see the full list of birth years that we captured up here. And then down here, I want to see what we get as the first two numbers every time we go through this list. So I am going to call this function. Let's call it up here. Filter 1700s. Just so that we can test and see if it works. Here we used a square bracket and not a round bracket. So we need to modify that. That needs to be a round bracket. So substring 0, 2. Let's reset. Let's run. Here we go. So now we're seeing all of the years. Perfect. And now we're grabbing the first two numbers, 19, 18, 17, and so on. So that's great. We even have UN for undefined or unknown. We'll deal with that in a separate case. But we are getting the 18s, the 19s, and the 17s, which is perfect. So that's how we know that this works. So now that we know it works, I can take out my console.log and I can go ahead with my if statement. So if the first two numbers are equal to 17, Then I want to append item. Let's do filtered birth years. Birth years I. So we're taking that element, right, and storing it in the filtered birth years. So basically, if we have 17 showing up in this list, then that element gets stored in the filtered lists, right? So we want to do it across the board. So we're gonna have, just copying and pasting, make things go a little bit quicker here. Filtered inventors. We're gonna have filtered occupations. And lastly, we'll have filtered inventions. Okay, so now I have my filter 1700 is working because we tested it out with the console.log. I'm going to remove this since we're done with our test, and let's move on to the update screen. So for the update screen, I'm just going to start off with something simple just to make sure that things work. Let's bring this down. Let's pull that in. I'm going to change this to update screen. And the only thing I'm going to put here just to start off is the set screen function. So I'll grab set screen, and I want to set that screen to be not screen 1. Let me go to show blocks, but I'll set this to be 1700s. So I'll call this update screen 1700s. All right, so I have my filter 1700s, my update screen 1700s. Now let's do our on event and make sure that when someone clicks on that button, it actually changes the screen and does the filtering. So let's do our on event here. So when someone clicks on the 1700s button, I want to filter the 1700s, and I also want to update screen for the 1700s. All right, so the only thing that I'll see happening here is that update screen, or the screen is going to change to 1700s. That's all I expect to happen for right now. So let's reset, let's run, click on 1700s, and it takes me to the 1700 screen. Perfect. We also have this go back button. Let's make sure that that takes us back to the home screen. So let's go to the UI controls, on event, and I'll do the 1700s go back, and I'll do set screen to be home. All right, so let's reset and run again. Click on 1700, it takes me here. Go back takes me here. All right, so when you click on 1700s, I want to see the list of inventors who were born in the 1700s. So let me reset this. Here we're going to update our update screen function to do that. So I'm going back to show text, and I want to make sure that every inventor shows up on the list, right? I want to loop through the inventors list and make sure their information shows up. So that suggests that I need a for loop. So I'm going to do for I is equal to 0, I less than inventors dot length, I plus plus, and what I want to do is change the output So if I'm in the 1700 screen, the ID here is the 1700s output. So I need to change the output to display something on the screen. So that suggests that I'm going to use the set text. Let's drag this over here and go back to show blocks so I can pick the right ID. And this is going to be the 1700s output. And the text that I want to display, just for testing purposes, will display inventors I. All right, we're going to change this later on, but we're just testing this out. So let's run. Let's reset. Run, click on 1700s, and it displays something here, which is good. So it shows up, it shows something here. All right. I need the filtered lists. I don't want the main list to show up here. I want the filtered list, right? So because remember that we're filtering on those who has a birth year of 1700. So I need the filtered inventors, and I also need the filtered inventors here. So I am missing something. So the yellow icon says that we need to use the equal equals. So let's use another equal sign here. And let's make sure we don't have any other errors. Reset. Let's run 1700s. Great. And let's go back. I am going to set a variable. I'm actually going to do this outside of the for loop. And I'm going to make this be like text output. And in here, or actually outside of the for loop, I'm going to create a variable called text output and make it empty. And then inside the variable, I'm going to set what that text output should be. So I'll have the filtered inventors, and I'll add on the filtered birth year, and I'll add on the filtered, what else do we have? Occupations, and the filtered inventions. Make sure I spelled that correctly. Okay, so but I also want to make sure there's some sort of formatting, because if I just run this as it is right now, let's run it and see. I think I have an error. Okay, filtered birth years. So let's run it. You'll notice that there's no real formatting. Things are kind of close together, no spaces, no commas. So I want to make sure that I put that in there as well. So I'll put, let's put name. I have a space there. Then I'll put, maybe just put like a comma, a space with a comma. Yeah, maybe we can just add that to start off at every point here. So we just add a space and a comma between some of these things. Let's go back, let's reset, let's run 1700s. Okay, now we have a little bit of formatting going on here. But I think the comma is out of place. So I think we need the comma and then the space. So for the comma, then the space, comma, and then the space. So that's a little bit better. Now the only problem is that it's showing just one name. So I'm thinking that the text output is being overwritten every time. So I want to add the text output every single time it goes through the list. So I'm just going to add it upon itself so that it continues to print out the names. And I'll also add something at the very end here. I'll do plus. I'm just going to add a new line, 2 new lines, so that we have some spacing. So let's reset. I'm going to run this, click on 1700s. Now we have every element of the list. So before we were just seeing one, right? And just by adding in the text output here, now I'm seeing every element of that filtered list. So just to make sure that this is indeed correct, I'm also going to do a console.log. Let's do console.log, and I want to print out the filtered inventors, just to make sure that what we see here is actually what's in the list. So let's reset and run 1700s, and that's perfect. So we have 2 members of that filtered inventors list, and those are the 2 that we see over here. So that looks great. So I'm going to take that console.log out. Since we tested it, it looks fine. And now I think we are ready to move forward with the rest of the screens. Now, one thing we want to note is we just want to simulate a user going through this. So let's reset this and run again. Go to 1700s, they may take a look, then they go back. Maybe they want to click on 1800s and 1900s. We are still yet to program that, and come back to 1700s. So you'll notice here, we have the list repeating twice. So let me go back again, 1700s. Now it's there 3 times. Let's go back, 1700s. Now we have the same list repeated 4 times. We don't want that. We want to make sure that every time they go to this list, they're only seeing the names once. We don't want the names to be repeated every time they click on that 1700s button. So all that we need to do here is just to reset the lists. So we have our filter lists here that's declared outside of the filter function. So it's always going to retain what's in that list. So we need to reset it every time we come to the filter function. So we can copy this and paste it down here. So instead of the vars, since the variables are already declared, we can just have it like this. All right, so we're making them empty, and then in here we fill them up again. So every time they click on 1700s, we make the list empty, and then we fill them up again. So let's reset this. Let's run it. Click on 1700s. That was great. Go back. 1700s again. No repeat. Go back. No repeat. So that's perfectly fine. That's great. That's exactly what we're looking for. So all we have to do here is just reset the lists. I'm going to create another screen for 1800s because now our code works as expected. So I'm just going to repeat a lot of these things. So I'm going to create a separate screen for 1800s, a separate one for 1900s, and a separate one for unknown. We're going to do it the same way that we did the 1700s. So let's go to design. And we have our home and we have the 1700s. The one I want to duplicate is the 1700s. So we're just going to do that. I'm going to click on duplicate here. And now we have screen 2. So just click on screen, click on the screen. I'm going to call this 1800s. So now we have our 1800 screen. I just have to change the labels. 1800s image 1, 1800s image 2, 1800s title. It's going to be 1800 prompt. And instead of 1700s, this will be 1800s. This is going to be 1800s output. And this is going to be 1800s go back. All right, so everything now has a label. I'm going to do the exact same thing for 1900s. So we're going to duplicate the screen. The screen is going to be 1900s. And we're going to change the labels again. 1900s image 1. Just copy that. So 1900s title. 1900s image 2. 1900s prompt. This will be 1900s. And then we have our 1900s output and the 1900s go back. All right, everything has an ID. Great. Just gonna do one more duplicate. Oops, that's not what I was looking for. Click on the screen, duplicate the screen, and this is going to be unknown. I keep misspelling that word, unknown, with an N. All right, so that's going to be the name of our screen. All right, so this is going to be unknown image 1. I misspelled it again. We're going to do unknown title, unknown image 2. This is going to be unknown prompt. Text will be unknown. And this will be unknown output. I'm going to make this lowercase. And this will be unknown. Go back. I'm going to change these to lowercase just to be consistent. Unknown title, unknown image. All right. It's really important to stay consistent. Perfect. So everything has a label. And now all our screens have, oh, we need to change the screen name to be unknown. So now we have home, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, and unknown. Now let's go back to our code and we're basically going to do the same thing that we did for 1700s. We're going to repeat it for 1800s, then 1900s, and then the unknown. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start with the buttons. The filtered lists and the variables are going to stay the same for every screen. I'm just going to start with the buttons. So we're going to copy this, and instead of 1700s, it will be 1800s. 1800s. So you see that these are called but not declared, which means we haven't created them yet. So we're going to create those now. So I'm going to copy the filter function here. Let's copy this. I'm going to paste it here. Check for birth years. Okay, first we're going to change this to 1800s. Check for birth years. Let's start with 18. We're going to filter. And here we're checking for 18. All right. And then I'm going to copy that update screen function and paste it here. This changed to 1800s. And that's great. But as you can see, we do have some things here that are just repeated. They're repetitive. We're actually going to create a function to handle all of those things because I don't want to copy and paste this again for 1900 and again for unknown. Some of these things we're going to have to place in a function. Now, we have not done functions with parameters as yet in this lesson or in this unit, so I'm not going to introduce that here. We have to stick with what we've learned so far. So even though this would be a great portion to put in a function, you need a parameter, and we just haven't gone through that in this lesson. So we're gonna leave these as the same. However, we can pull some stuff out, some other things out. So let's make this a little bit bigger. We're not gonna use the debug console right now, but for this section, we can remove this, or actually let's do set on the 1700 side. I'm going to remove this and I'm going to create a new function called reset lists. And this will be functions reset lists. And I'll just paste that here. So every time I want to reset a list, then I'm going to, or let's put reset filter lists actually. So every time I want to reset the filter list, I'm going to call this function instead of typing this over and over. So I'll copy this and put it here. And I'll copy this and replace all of this with the reset filtered list. So let's reset this and run it again. Let's go to 1700s, go back 1700s. Let's go to 1800s. 1800s are showing up fine. Let's go back, that's 1700s again. Okay, so now that between 1700s and 1800s, we see that they work, we're just going to copy and paste the same thing for the 1900s. So let's start off with our buttons. So we'll do 1900s, 1919, 1900s, go back. And we'll do the same thing for the unknown. So this will be filter unknown, update screen unknown. And this is unknown, go back. Perfect. So now we've added in the 1900s and the unknown. Now we're going to add in our filter for the 1900s. Just want to copy this. Filter for the 1900s. So 18 turns into 19. And I'm going to do my update screen for the 1900s. And we'll do the filter for the unknown. Let's copy this, paste it. Filter for the unknown. And I'll actually do if it's not equal to 19 and if the first two numbers are not equal to 18 and the first two numbers are not equal to 17. So it changes to 18 and 17. So I'm checking to say if the first two numbers are not 18, 19, sorry, are not 17, 18, or 19, then it must be unknown. So that's how we do the filtering for the unknown. And then I'll go to the update screen. Let's copy this, paste this, update screen unknown. We're going to set the screen to be unknown. And this will be the unknown output. And just make sure I don't see any yellow or any red on the left-hand side here. I don't see any. So now it's just for us to run it and test it. So now it's saying that on line 30, it's referring a 1900s button which does not exist. So let's go to design. Let's go to the 1900s. Actually, let's go home. So this should be 1900s, not 1900. So 1800s, 1700s. So I just needed to clear that typo there. Let's run it, reset, run. All right, so no error showing up down here. 1700 looks fine. The 1800s also look fine. The 1900s, those are great. And then we have the unknown. So you see the birth year is unknown here. And that looks fine. So let's just go back, let's click around. Let's make sure that, nothing is showing up as repeated. And it looks like everything is in order. Now, the other thing I want to add is an index to say, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can see an actual number, like the number of people. Um, so I'm just going to add an index here. So I'll say, I'll do new index equals I plus 1. And then with the text output here, I'm just going to put new index. And I'll put the plus, and I'll just put a dot and a space. So from text output to name, we're just going to make sure that's replicated across the board. Reset, run on 1700s. Oh, I did not add my new index to all my other functions. So I'll just add that here, add that here. And add that here. And I think I need to specify it as var. Perhaps. Or maybe I need to declare it outside of the for loop, but let's see what it looks like. Okay, so I think that works. We have 73 in the 1900s, we have 41 in the 1800s, 2 in the 1700s, and 2 in the unknowns. Perfect. So this is exactly what we are looking for. And we are all set. We are done. So we declared our variables. We use the get column function to pull in the data from the data sets. And these are all stored as lists. Then down here, we create our filtered lists. And these are things that we're going to populate with the filter function. Down here, we have the buttons. What happens when a user clicks on a button? So we either have one of two things. Either we're going to do a filter and then update the screen, or we're going to set the screen back to home. So depending on the button that the user clicks on, we have one of those three options, or a combination of those options. Then down here, we created like a helper function where, if you have something that's repeated, we just put it in a function. So we create a reset filtered list that's going to change or reset our list to be an empty list so that we can do another set of filtering. So every time so now we have our filter function. And when we're filtering by the 1700s, we want to reset the filtered list, loop through the inventors. If the first two numbers are 17 or 18 or 19, then we want to add those items to our filtered list. Birth years, inventors, occupation, and so on. So we do the same thing for 1800s, same thing for 1900s, same thing for unknown. All right, now we are going to the update screen function. Be 1700s for doing the update screen 1700s. Then we want to specify our text output. Our text output is going to be every inventor within the array plus their birth year, occupation, and inventions. And then we'll set the text output, or we'll set the 1700s output to be that text output that we just created. Do the same thing for 1800s, the same thing for 1900s, and the same thing for unknown. And with that, we are all set. So thank you again for watching. Really appreciate it. I hope you like this video. Please feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. See ya.